Okay, it is about that time again. Welcome, everyone. This is John Selway. That's me. And we're here for 343 Labs TV every Saturday, every day. Not me, but 343 Labs. Almost every day we do this. And today's my day, as usual. And anyway, welcome to all of you. And I'm just noticing the chat's already active. What's up, Thorsten from Germany? Max Wild, as usual, is hanging around. Who else do we have in here? Tori. Welcome, Tori. So, yeah, today, as you might have noticed, the intro music is a little different. It is a track by a friend of mine, a good old friend of mine and partner of mine, Jason Sostek, and myself under the name of Synapse, called Freak. And it's definitely an example of the kind of electro-funk sort of feeling that we are exploring the roots of today. And basically, it's an excuse just to hang out for me and to hang out and make some electro beats and talk about a little bit about where, how I learned about it, what I learned about it. And, sort of, then we can talk a little bit about, how does this sort of develop and influence music over time, and what does it have to do with techno even, right? A lot, actually, quite a lot. And I think some of you out there already know this, but for those of you who are kind of new, that's kind of why I wanted to do this, is just sort of look at it as this kind of a ABC's building blocks of electro and electro funk, and listen to some examples of some beats. I recreated a couple of them with some drums, and I don't know. Let's see. I want to remind everyone in the chat. Hi, chat. It's right there. What's up? That, I appreciate your questions and comments. Feel free to throw those in there, and I'll do my best to follow along and answer or show examples if relevant. And I should also mention, as we have been doing lately, we have a giveaway this week. We have 4 months of a Splice sample subscription. So, look out here in the chat for info about that. I think you may still have a chance to sign up. And we will announce the winner by the end of the show at some point. So let's see. Let's listen to a couple of things. I'm going to switch over to my... well, actually, no. Let's first... I'm going to go ahead and do this now. I have a guest, and his name I've already mentioned is the guy who I made that track in the intro music with. So he's been a guest before. You've also seen him on Abe Duquesne's show. Everybody, please welcome my good old friend, Jason Sostek. How's it going, Jason?
Hello, everybody. How are we doing today?
You're going to be silly, aren't you?
Of course.
And so... Anyway, Jason and I started a label called Serotonin in the mid-90s. And we were both making techno, ravey kind of stuff, but we also found that we were both really into other kind of syncopated, funky styles, right? So electro, IDM, more experimental things. But especially electro with a little bit of a funk element to it. And so we started Serotonin with those things in mind. And we started a project together called Synapse that, we didn't do a lot of records, but I'd like to think that we did a few that really kind of hit the nail on the head. And we managed to reach some people who, were really into it. And I mean, I think I've had a couple of people tell me recently, electro producers recently, tell us some of our early releases were inspirational for them. So that was really nice to hear. So
and people are still playing them today.
Yeah, people still play them. And, we're still releasing records a little slowly nowadays, but we've tried to keep that going. Just it comes in and out of our consciousness and comes in and out of, being a label, basically. It's like when we pay attention to it, it happens. So anyway, tell me a little bit, Jason, about sort of your first exposure to what we're talking about here in terms of electro and electro funk.
Well, when I was growing up in the 80s, I was looking for anything that looked like it might have a synthesizer on it. And of course, back in the 80s, that was a lot of music. But having older brothers and sisters and older people around me, they were showing me some of this krautrock stuff, Kraftwerk and whatnot. And I would hear it, like we all did when we were kids. We would hear things on the radio, but we weren't genre conscious.
Right.
You know, there was stuff that we liked and stuff we didn't like. And it seemed like everybody, thanks to New Wave, was using drum machines, samplers, synthesizers, and that's what I really cared about.
Sure.
But of course, coming from being old enough to actually be into rock music before I was into electronic music, there were certain kind of rhythms and certain kind of beats that I liked more than others. And when house music started, for me, it was cool because it was another form of synthesizer music, but it was also kind of rhythmically boring to me. I mean, quite honestly.
Even though you do make a lot of techno in house.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, if you're talking about the mid 80s, there was an awful lot of rhythmically interesting things to listen to. And of all those things, house music was generally the straight ahead in rhythm.
Well,
which is its feature.
It's different. I mean, it's, you know, like disco before it, disco and house, and then techno have the 4 on the floor quarter note kick drum that's sort of driving everything, and then all of the syncopation that happens is in between. Right?
Is in the music. It's left to the music and the sounds or whatever.
So let's get back to
electro is electronic rock, right? And I was into rock.
That's kind of a good way to look at it. You mentioned krautrock, which obviously is a obvious segue into something like Kraftwerk, which, you know, if you ask anybody, you know, what are like the roots of techno, they're going to mention Kraftwerk at some point, right? But we also have to acknowledge that
about the krautrock aspect to narrow in on is that they were and their godfathers like Noi, which are not really an electro band and not terribly synthetic.
It's like
but very
rhythmic and hypnotic and experimental,
rhythm, in the rhythm section. And that's what a lot of what was going on in the 70s was. And I think electro, as it became electro, the genre, continued that value of experimentation on the rhythm section, on the drum section.
Sure. Well, I want to listen to a little bit of
like, okay, we're going to make grooves with the music.
Sure. Speaking of grooves, which is kind of like the focus of today, is, you know, starting with the rhythm and the rhythm section, I suppose, if you start to think about bass and stuff like that, is kind of listening to the beats and, you know, connecting the dots between what we're talking about and what it sounds like. And in that kind of, you know, krautrock, German experimental rock into early electronic music vein, you know, Kraftwerk is part of that, obviously. And Kraftwerk is the biggest influence, I would say, the biggest single influence. Not the only one. Of course, there's more. And then you also have to think about, where did Kraftwerk get influences from? There was, let's see, wrong way. There's an article I read recently. I read this a long time ago. They reprinted this recently. There's a little quote here from Karl Bartos of Kraftwerk saying, "We were all fans of American music, soul, Tamla, Motown, James Brown. We always tried to make an American rhythm feel with a European approach to harmony and melody." And like right there is kind of like a perfect way of illustrating like what techno and electro becomes, because it's this balance of different styles and different cultures coming together, right?
They were turned on funky stuff.
Right. So, you know, you get these German guys doing this art music, but they're making these beats inspired by American R&B, soul, and funk, right? And in 1977, sorry, too many things open. They do Trans-Europe Express, which is kind of like, for me, like ground zero for electro. And everybody's heard this, probably. Well, a lot of you have heard this. I'm going to, you know, we're taking a chance here playing copyrighted music on YouTube. I'm hoping that we're just going to do a little clip of it.
Just play enough for them to recognize it.
Right. So I have these edited already, so they don't play too long. So let's have a listen.
And then we talk over it, and it's guaranteed.
Yeah. Sure. All right. Just so you hear what's happening there. It's really simple, and it's not even. Is it even funky? Like,
not terribly,
but
they're trying. But
there's something about it. But there's something amazing about it, and there is a funk element. There is an influence. There's a one, and that's definitely one of the things I want to talk about. With like when you're looking for that one of those little things that make it work. The emphasis on the downbeat, on the one, whether it's every bar or every 2 bars or even every 4. That everything can be all over the place, syncopated and crazy, but on the one, it all comes back together. And here, you get that emphasis on the beat with the trance and the kick, and all the other drums are, except for the snare, are happening. Let's play it again. All right. So as far as electro production goes, the other elements to this are like the sound design. These are synthesized drums, and they were all electronic, and they were making their own drum circuits at this point. You couldn't get off or modular synths, I suppose, but you couldn't go and get like a preset synth drum in 1977 that could sound like that. There were like organ drums and things like that, but they were doing this. The other thing is that a lot of these drums they were recording by hand. They weren't necessarily sequenced. So that's another thing about these rhythms is there's a human element to it. They're not perfectly machine timed. And then, okay, so of course, there's the sound design. There's like that high frequency thing that sounds like a shaker or a hi-hat that has all these crazy effects on it. And that's another important part of electro is how the drums sound, right?
Now fast forward a few years and this track becomes really important because...
Well, we're getting there. All right. So I want to point out another 70s beat that's super influential on, and this amongst a lot of other drum beats. But this is a famous break. There's a song called Captain Sky Super Sporm, and it's kind of like disco funk, and it has all these different drum beats all through it. This one particular break in the middle that's famous in hip hop. Let's listen to it. So you can kind of hear the similarity between the feel of this and Trans-Europe Express, except this one's more funky, more syncopated. But it's still got the noisy, synthy hi-hats behind the acoustic hi-hat. These are real drums. And the reason I bring this up is this and another Kraftwerk track, Numbers. Everybody's heard this, whether it's been sampled in a modern hip-hop or pop song.
And now they're sequencing to get it perfect.
Well, right. This is later. This is by the early 80s now. Right, so that's
1980, in fact.
Right. And also the sound design's more sophisticated on these sounds, right? There's better effects.
This was their goal, be 100% electronic.
Yeah.
It just took them the entire decade to get there.
Right. So, but Numbers and this break from Superstorm are the beats that got replayed on a Roland TR 808 for Planet Rock. And Planet Rock is like sort of the pinnacle of like electro, funk, and hip hop kind of crossing over. And
by Planet Rock, we have the name Electro because they weren't calling Kraftwerk Electro per se.
That's true. Planet Rock, people used to call Kraftwerk techno pop.
Yeah.
Right? Before there was techno as a genre.
Wasn't a need for a genre name when you were the only ones doing it or one of only a handfuls doing it.
Right. So here's Super Sporm again. And then I've got 2 beats from Planet Rock. This is from the bonus beats. This is where you hear clearly the same kick drum pattern, or almost the same kick drum pattern as Super Sporm, which is awesome sounding on an 808 with the synth in the background. Now, I'm keeping an eye on the chat while we're talking here. First of all, Trill J Mill asks, what's the best place to start for making house and techno music? And I'm going to say 343 Labs. We're kind of focusing more on electro and kind of roots of techno and house today, but definitely keep asking questions. And we have a lot of content on 343 Labs TV, and then we have our courses and everything where we teach fundamentals of how to get started with all of this, all of these genres. And you also asked the same guy, Trill J Mill, like Encore Jay-Z and Linkin Park, electro rock. Not exactly. We're kind of reaching back farther in terms of, Jason mentioned electro and rock. He's really talking about experimental rock from the late 60s and early 70s, where these, kind of post-psychedelic...
Well, it was the prog rockers, the
progressive records, post-psychedelic rock records where people were exploring with synthesizer sounds, right? That's kind of the very early beginnings. Some of what we're talking about comes from that too. Like, that's where the Kraftwerk connection is. So, cool. So we're up to like the very early 80s, and this is pretty much the early 80s is where electro funk became a thing. And like you start to these drum machines came out and became accessible, and you hear all these early hip hop records, and a lot of early hip hop are kind of electro funk records with raps. I would say I think you can generalize that much. It wasn't it was either like DJs playing breaks off of vinyl, or a lot, and then they might go into the studio and have drum machines, and someone would program, the producer would program beats like what we hear with Afrika Bambaataa and the Soul Sonic Force, Planet Rock. I would say it pretty much diverged after that. By the mid to late 80s, hip hop tempos had slowed down a lot. The style changed a lot, and then
a lot of the electro was rap.
Yeah,
there wasn't the need for the distinction.
Right. I think it was kind of all part of the same culture.
There wasn't. I don't think there was a value in purely instrumental dance music. Was not the goal. It was anything that could rock a party. So if it had lyrics or if it didn't, the DJ could make it work.
Definitely. And also back then, I think you would hear a lot of genre mixing, right? You wouldn't hear like only one kind of music all night. You'd hear a lot of eclectic music that had the right beats mixed together. So I guess let's keep going through our little discussion on the history of this. And, and this is, I'm not going up to the modern day, right? We're sticking in the early 80s, basically, late 70s, early 80s.
So 86 is probably the most important moment there, because by then we have this freestyle movement, and there's Miami bass, and there's all kinds of...
Right. Once we get into the 80s, like what is electro and electro-funk kind of diverges into many other genres. I mean, you mentioned freestyle. Freestyle, like the archetypal freestyle beat, kind of starts with Planet Rock, but then they're singing melodies and, kind of... they also
rap
call
itself, what we were just discussing, how it was all a kind of melange, and people could do, like, with electronics and with funky beats, people were making all kinds of commercial music. There developed this group that was very serious about the very specific Kraftwerk influence beat, all electronic instrumental music, that wanted to just have that and just mix that. And it turned into an underground thing. And that's when the term electro becomes important, to distinguish it from all those other funky pop sounds that were going on. And the reason I bring up 86 is because that's when Cybertron comes out, which is heralded as, early Detroit techno record, but it's actually an electro record, and they were electro hits. So techno could have been electro, but it didn't.
Yeah, but let's keep talking about this. So you talk about techno could be electro and techno from the very beginning were definitely intertwined. I mean, I would say they're kind of like cousins or brothers. They're in the same family.
Brothers.
And then you think about someone like Juan Atkins, one of the the original pioneers of Detroit techno. Started out his musical career basically making electro and electro funk, and he was in a project with what's the name of his partner in Cybertron? It was like Rick Davis. Rick Davies. Davis. Sorry, I apologize for but I think we're about 90% on that name. But so Cybertron, and this is another one that people may be familiar with. Oh, except if I play the wrong track, you won't be. But here we go.
Ready, 1, 2.
Richard Davis.
Richard Davis. Thanks for Googling that.
He was the vocalist and the lyricist.
All right, stop right there before the bass melody comes in.
So what I wanted to point about this track in particular is it's kind of revivalist. It's already kind of romantic about things that already happened in the early 80s. So it's a little bit out of step, isn't it?
Well, I mean, think about it. Like, let's say you're a kid and you're interested in music, and you're hearing all this stuff when you're growing up, and your formative years are like the late 70s, early 80s, and you're just, this amazing music is inspiring you. But by the time you know enough and have enough experience and have the gear to make it, it's a few years later. So there's always like a generational kind of delay on.
That's exactly what happened to me.
Yeah. So I heard all this stuff on the radio when I was a kid too, but I was much too young to do anything about it. But it stayed in the back of my mind. And, 10, 15 years later, when I knew what I was doing, I was like, oh yeah, I remember this. I can do that. I have the gear now. Right. And it was all, that's, some of this is sort of retroactive, like rediscovery of our youth here. But all of this music was totally influenced everything I do, from whether I'm trying to make my own electro and electro funk music, or whether I'm making techno or house or other styles of dance music. The basic building blocks of rhythm that I learned from this music, I try to incorporate some of that in everything. So my grooves are not, even though they're futuristic and mechanical and computerized, there's still an element of human, organic syncopation and funk, kind of, something more than just a machine sound, right?
These are fundamental things, viewers. So you can't improve on them. You can make them your own.
Yeah.
You can find ways to take them to the next level, but you know these basics, and they can always help and inform your art, because there's truths that just cannot be denied in that field when you connect with people on that
Sure.
level. So that's why they just keep coming back up. I mean, by the time in the 90s we started Serotonin, we were revitalizing. We were revivals, and then it continued. And people who listened to us in the 2000s kept it going, and we all owe this debt because it was a truth that they discovered, and we're just the carriers of it.
Yeah.
Forward into the future.
It all just keeps cycling forward. And I'm going to acknowledge the chat again. How's it going? Let's see. T4 Trouble mentions breakdancing. Absolutely. I definitely was like the nerdy suburban white kid who was like romanticizing breakdancing and like what life was like in New York, for sure, in like the early to mid 80s. So that is definitely a part of my childhood. And
I was actually living in New York in the late 70s, and remember the blackout in 78, when the kids broke into all the electronic stores and stole the DJ equipment and the boom boxes.
You were around for that?
Yeah, I mean, I was walking home from the theater because I was on Broadway with them, and the subways were, nobody had any power. We had to walk home, and we walked up 8th Ave, and at the time that was where all the shops were, and there was glass everywhere and people just stealing everything. And some people say that's pretty much the night that hip hop was born. Because
I've heard that story. That's I tend to agree. That's I think
if you look at the records and you look at the timing and of it, I mean,
sure.
Yes, there was Herc and those dudes before that, but until it becomes a movement of the people, until enough people get involved, it doesn't reach the critical mass that to become the next big thing. And that got the tools into the hands of the people that were able to get that critical mass. When more records more records came out, and more DJs started, and more parties started, and hip hop probably could not have taken off if that had not happened.
I think you're probably right there.
I'm not the first one to mention that. That's a theory, but it certainly seems to line up with the historical record.
Indeed. Back to the chat. Thorsten H. Think I love electro-funk since I was down on Earth. Wait. I think I know what you mean there. Did you come from space, I wonder? But I know what you mean. Space is the place. And yeah, La Nouvelle mentions Rocksteady Crew found in 1977, that's the same year that Trans-Europe Express from Kraftwerk was released and blew up in the clubs in New York. So that was an integral part of the sound. So let's move on. We listened to Cybertron Clear, which is like the Detroit connection, not the only one, but a very early example, and a really influential record. I mean, it's been sampled a million times, both in electronic dance music and in pop music and in hip hop. I think it's like a famous, I forget which track it is. It's a Missy Elliott track that uses it really well, I might add. And then, all right, so another very famous group and a big influence on me is Nucleus. And my favorite Nucleus track, and this was another like early hip hop breakdance era electro funk group. And
you can hear that wiki stuff on the high end. It's just like Trans Europe Express.
Well, right. This one's got the rim shot in there, and again, there's these modulation effects. And
Snare's getting kind of big,
That's exactly what I was going to mention.
Commercial sound
is that one of the things in electro is you have this. There's the funk thing, and funk snares are usually tight, and they're not like hitting you over the head. It's the emphasis on the one, and then all the intricate syncopation and then call and response between elements in between, and then it comes back around to the one. This one's got like the 2 and the 4 loud. It's like it's more rocking, and it's more like,
and it's very commercial. It's got vocals. It's a song. We didn't get into it, but
right.
It's
we're focusing on the rhythm today.
This track is actually the ultimate example of everything coming together, because it's got all the electronics. It's got the synthesizer. It's got the beat, it's got the drums, and it's got the rap, and it's got the vocals and the lyrics. It's basically, and it is computer.
Sure.
Page.
Well, this song, Push the Button, I mean, the famous Nucleus song was Jam on It. Boom, 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 boom. I mean, whatever. If you're old enough, you know what that bass line is. And that was the big hit. But this one, for me, as far as like pushing forward to the electro sound, Push the Button is the one. And all right, so I think, Jason, we're almost coming up to the halfway point, and I know you have to run and move on with your very busy day. So I just want to say thanks for coming in and talking about these sort of roots and some of the past of where we're coming from with electro and electro funk rhythms. And I'm going to continue on and take some of these ideas. I've got a couple of beats in here that I already started, but basically we're going to, for the second half of the show,
teach them the basics.
Yeah, we're just going to take some of these ideas and make something new with it. So anyway,
I'll tune in at the end and hear what you got.
Cool. I am going to switch back here. So anyway, thanks very much, Jason. I'm going to take you out of the stream.
Bye-bye.
And thanks again for being on. All right. Adios.
Adios.
So it was really cool that Jason could stop by and chat with me a little bit. It was a nice way to kind of warm up and get a little bit of perspective where we're coming from with this. And we're at the halfway point where I can take a moment to acknowledge the chat again and all the viewers out there. Thanks for joining us. This is Selway Techno Saturdays for 343 Labs 343 TV. We're streaming almost every day at 1 p.m. and Saturday is my day. And this is my genre focused show. I do kind of a cycle of 4 shows. Last week we did kind of a focus on a particular plugin. We did Iris 2, the spectral sampler, this sampling synthesizer. Today we're kind of looking at electro funk rhythms, and just looking at the history a little bit, and then analyzing a little bit of what's going on in these beats. Next week, I'm still honestly sorting out exactly what my my topic is going to be, but usually the third show of the 4-week cycle is centered around arranging. So like taking some of the ideas we visited and making some music with it, arranging it, and kind of taking the ideas and developing them. And then every fourth is Techno Friends, where I bring in, it's kind of like today a little bit, but more kind of the whole show is a discussion and a listening session. So I bring in friends, people I've worked with, people I think are interesting to, kind of hang out, have a conversation, and, you guys can bring in your questions and so on and so forth. So we are doing a giveaway. Just as a reminder, there are links here in the chat. We are sponsored by Splice, and we're giving away a 4-month subscription for their sample library. Definitely go to the link right there in the chat and enter. You still have a chance, and we're going to announce the winner at the end of the hour before we sign off. So check that out. And also, I'd like to kindly ask, if you're not already, to follow, to subscribe, to like or dislike. Be honest. Give us some feedback about what we're doing here. And of course, also right below, we've got links to 343 Labs. 343 Labs is a school. We have physical locations in New York City and now also at Riverside Studios in Berlin. We've got a lot of classes running. We have online classes and in-person classes. I do a synthesis and sound design for producers class where I look at making your own sounds from a musical perspective. I mean, of course, it's technical. Synthesis and sound design is technical. And it's about sort of demystifying and becoming more aware of the different types of synthesis and how you might approach them as a creative musician. And we're actually doing some free classes, free workshops. Keep an eye out for that. I'll be leading one and just sort of going over some of what we do. And if you're interested, yeah, definitely take a look for that. And check our website to see when the upcoming courses you can sign up for are happening. So, back to the chat real quick. Looks like everybody's talking about funk and dancing and breakdancing and that movie Beat Street. Yeah, I saw that when I was a kid. And I definitely got caught up in that. It was a huge influence on me. And a lot of people, I guess. So, let's see. I need to make sure that Jason is really actually gone. So let me get him out of here. Hang up. Okay, he is disconnected. I was still hearing him knock around in his basement. Honestly, he forgot to hang up the call. And let's get back to the main screen here. Yeah, see, there's Jason still connected. Let's get him out of here. Okay, bye, Jason. He's finally gone. So, back to the beats. Let's take a look at some of what I already put together here. So, oh, that's too fast. Let's slow it down. So the original sort of tempo of Trans-Europe Express is 107, 108, and that's more kind of along the lines of a hip hop or tempo, I would say. And to make this beat, the sounds I'm using are Ableton Live DS or drum synths. And these are part of Max for Live now in the Live 11 update. They've incorporated a lot of the Max for Live devices into the categories into the browser. They're a little more easy to find now. So you can go into instruments and see there's a folder called drum synth, for example. I mean, there's also presets for the kits containing those drum synth instruments in the drum category. But I just, I threw in a drum rack here and I dropped in a DS kick for my kick, a snare for my snare. I have 2 hi-hats, one for a closed and one for an open. And then I used this module, this DS FM, to make the percussive noise that's sort of similar to what Kraftwerk had going on in Trans-Europe Express. And now that I'm hearing this in my headphones with a lot of deep bass in that kick, and I think that kick is a little bit too subby. I want it to be shorter and thump and less of a long decay on that. So let's bring the decay shorter. If you listen to a lot of Kraftwerk percussion, these synthetic drums that they made, they're very precise and sharp, and a lot of them have these fast decay times. So it's not like a big 808 kind of a boom that you hear kind of on a modern 808 beat. These sounds for this kind of early electro, this is kind of pre-electro, they're very sharp and tight. So short decay on that. That's going to give more of the feel that I want. Maybe a little bit more. And I have to say, when I first loaded up this snare, this DS snare, it sounded so almost like the original. Like the tuning was a little different, but it's so similar. I'm just going to listen to the original Kraftwerk. All right, it's shorter, but it's a little shorter and brighter, but it's really, really similar. All right, let's hear. Right. Again, I need to back up on that decay. Right. And then I want to point this out. I mean, whatever kind of music you're making with your drums, the groove is determined not just by the timing and how you play them, but the sound of the drum, the articulation of the drum, whether it's short or long or bright or dark or all of the above, right? How those sounds move and change over time. To give it, when you have a really short, punchy snare like that, it gives a different feel to the groove, to the rhythm, as opposed to that. That's much heavier, of course, right? So I'm bringing that decay down really, really short, and oops. That tune is changing the pitch of the lower frequencies of the drum, the fundamental. Color is kind of a filter. If I bring it all the way up to 100, the noise gets a little thinner. All right, that's close enough for me. All right, this guy, this one's less close to the original sound. It's more, it's not just white noise. It's kind of complex modulation. FM is frequency modulation, right? So there's a high frequency modulation happening of a sound, and it's the way that it's tuned is creating inharmonic noise. So that's what it sounds like, just without, there's feedback, it's modulating itself. So I'm making a bunch of white, or close to white noise by adding feedback into this. And I have the pitch up very high. If I bring it too low, right, it sounds like a, kind of a note, right? I want that pitch to be so high I can't even hear it, and we're only hearing that note, the noise. The tone is a filter. Now, what's missing from this, part of the groove of this is the effects. And that's another thing I want to talk about in terms of like making these beats sound more electro or more like that vibe that I'm going for. And it's not only just dry drum sounds. We've got to think about delays and reverbs and modulation effects like flangers and phasers. And this is kind of a fun way to start learning about drum effect processing for electronic music, starting with these basics. Now, the original again is... You can hear there's something changing in that white noise sound. It's rising and falling. It's either a flanger or a phaser, right? It's a modulation effect. It's something that's going to change the tone of the sound over time. Let's try pitch and modulation. Phaser flanger. That's the new Live 11 beta update. They've combined. These used to be separate. Phaser and flanger were separate devices. Now we have one device that combines phaser and flanger, and then also has a doubler, which is another variation on a similar theme. Let's hear what this sounds like. That's pretty cool. But it's too fast. And right now it's sweeping up and down every 2 bars. So it's just going up for a bar and down for a bar. Let's change that to hertz. So it's just sort of slowly sweeping up and down independently of the beat. It has a nice visual here. These updated audio effects in Live 11 are pretty cool. So you get to kind of get a nice visual to see, give you an indication of what the effect is doing to the sound. You can see here that there's multiple frequencies. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 notches, notch filters basically, that are those filters are being swept up and down and causing this kind of slow evolution of tone. Let's try the flanger. All right, I think phaser is more along the lines of what I want to hear. I'm not trying to copy them exactly, but phaser to me sounded more interesting. Also, I want to thin this sound out a little bit. Let's go ahead and add an EQ. My go-to is EQ 8. And we'll throw that after the phaser. Yeah, there's a lot of low frequency in this sound that doesn't need to be there. So high pass. And you can see that notch in the spectral display of the EQ. There's another notch. That's what the phaser's doing. It's causing these phase cancellation notches to happen and sweep up and down. It's a little heavy. I'm going to bring some of the dry signal in there. All right, there's one more element missing here. In the original, it sounds like there's some kind of more atmosphere, and there's a delay on this noisy percussion sound. I won't call it a hi-hat. It's not exactly a hi-hat, but it's kind of like that. Especially if I were to thin it out more and remove more low frequencies from the sound, it'll start sounding more hi-hat-like. But we need a delay. So let's go into time and space. We have our standard live delay. We have echo, which has more character. It's like a vintage analog tape style delay with modulation, and there's also a built-in reverb. That one, I'm going to go with that one. This device is going to be more like the sort of devices that Kraftwerk had at their disposal in hardware. This is capable of giving you this kind of vintage tone. All right. All right. All right, so I'm going to try to get this rhythm right. Right now it's set to dotted. So if I have it eighth notes, I'm actually hearing 3/16 notes. Let's make that notes. That sounds more like it. I'm filtering the sound to make the delay a little bit brighter. Pan that over. Pretty close. Now, back in the day, they wouldn't have had perfectly quantized delays. They would have had to tune it by ear by adjusting the time. So and having it be just a little bit off is actually kind of cool. It gives it a little bit of a different groove when it's not exactly perfectly quantized to eighth notes or whatever. So it's kind of almost making like a very subtle swing, just a little bit by having this loose timing on the echo. And that's really important with rhythm, I think. If you're real careful about the subtleties of it, your groove will be better instead of just being perfectly right on time every step. Let's see what else I have here. Okay, we have our there's our Super Sporm beat. And this time I'm using the DS hi-hats. And I've got two of them. This one's very short. And you can hear it kind of disappearing sometimes. right? And that's when the open hi-hat's happening. So the open hi-hat is the same device, just with a longer decay time. And in the drum kit, they're choking each other. The open hi-hat's being cut off by the closed hi-hat. So if I go in and turn that off, right now you can see this hi-hat. Let's call that closed. We'll call this one open, I think. They're both on the same choke channel. If I make them none or different ones, you hear the open hi-hat playing over. And that's not how a real hi-hat works. It's one instrument that opens and closes and it chokes itself. So that's how that works. That's how you get your hi-hats or other drum sounds to cut each other off in Live's drum rack. All right, then we have our numbers beat. How's the chat doing? Thorsten H says thumbs up for the content. Thank you, Thorsten. Enigmatic Onion says hello from your local upstate New York mailman. You got a tough job nowadays. Thank you for hanging in there. And Tori says, I love Kraftwerk. Well, I do too. And I hope all of you, if you haven't heard Kraftwerk before, go dive in and listen to their whole catalog from beginning to end. There's so much amazing stuff. And you'll hear so much important sort of influential ideas from their catalog. All right, so we're into the kind of, this is like the numbers beat or the Planet Rock beat. That's kind of like the modern archetype of electro, like or like say freestyle, etc. It usually has a beat, often has a beat similar or based around this one. All right, let's see. Although by the time we're getting into the early 80s, we were talking about this before, the 808 became available also. And there's other drum machines that people use too, but 808's really like the famous one that has that sound. The 808 and also the 606 to an extent is kind of like the 606 is similarly it's a drum synth, drum machine. It's a little lighter. It doesn't have, like the kick doesn't have the same impact on the 606, but it's still really good. I've used it a lot for electro tracks. There's that 808 boom now. I want to point out this drum kit I'm using. This is not the live stock 808 drum rack. This is a drum rack from Legovelt, Dutch electronic producer. Very prolific, made a lot of really great music. And he has some, this is from a few years ago already now. I think this one's like for live 9.5 and up is when he released this. So, but he made this Smackos 808 simulator, or I guess he sampled his own 808 and set up this nice rack with effects. And you can kind of simulate the old recording technology with these effects that he has in there. He has these production year age. You can make it sound earlier or later in terms of like how clean and clear the sounds are. You can add some noise. I don't need the noise. You can have, there's some different distortion and compression effects that can make it sound like it's going through older or newer analog gear. There's an expensive mixer control, transistor spread. There's a whole bunch of different effects going on in here. It sounds really good. Push, I think, is a limiter. And then tape smudge. It's like kind of like dirty analog. Bad old tape machine effect. Now, there are plugins you can get that more accurately emulate like tape machines and that kind of distortion and saturation and tone that you get. This one is just using stock Ableton devices to simulate that, and it does a pretty decent job. You can hear the samples that were recorded are not super perfectly clean. There's like noise in the background and hiss in the background that when you squash it, it comes up and it comes part of the character of the rhythm. So yeah, that's another really important point with like getting the vibe for certain styles of electro is how you process those drums. Jason is still here. He's hanging out in the chat. It says rock beat. Yeah, it is kind of more rocking. With the snare, loud snare is what makes it feel, it's like it's more rocking, I would say. And it's like less funky this way, but it still has that touch, right? And Cosmic J says, I miss my 606. I modded the trig outputs. Still got its partner, the 101. Awesome. That's like, if I had to pick one synth on a desert island, that might be, well, maybe not because it's not polyphonic, but if I had to pick two, a mono and a poly, I would probably pick a 101 as my desert island monophonic synth. So much fun. So now Cosmic J mentioned something. He mentions triggers. Now the triggers in a drum machine and old analog drum machines are used to like send a signal to another machine to tell it to do something. So like if you have a synth, you can use the trigger out from your drum machine to play a note in a sequence or to trigger an envelope modulation. But there's a little secret. It's not super secret. I would say it's not very common knowledge. People who are really nerdy about electro know this. But the 808 trigger output, it's basically just like a little pulse. It's like an on-off, like a square wave. And it's so fast that you don't hear, it's not repeating. You don't hear a frequency. It's just a little pulse. And the sound of that is the most like perfect, in my mind, the most electro drum sound, percussion sound that I can imagine. It's just literally like the sound of voltage. It's so electro. And a lot of 808 sampled 808 kits don't include the sample of the trigger out. This one does. Of course, Lego Velt, he knows. Of course, Lego Velt's sample pack includes the trigger zap. Oops, not that, the trigger. Right. And we're hearing all the noise in the background because of all the compression and everything. But that has some effects on it, I think, as well. It sounds like it has maybe like it almost sounds like it has a spring reverb on it. I have a clean sample of the 808 trigger here. Let's take a look at that. So that's literally it. It's just, it's like one pulse of a square wave, just the positive cycle. And that sounds like that. All right, so I first figured this one out. All right, this is my last musical example, which we didn't get to before with Jason, so you had to go. This is a Livin' on the Nile extended club remix by another very influential producer in electro funk, Egyptian Lover. Let's take a listen to that really quick. All right, so there's a lot going on there. There's a lot of effects. It sounds really big. This track is amazing, by the way. It's so powerful. On a huge system, it mixes right in with techno. Like the power of this with like the reverb and how the bass is mixed sounds so good. So anyway, so that's that sound. I programmed the same rhythm from that Living on the Nile beat. And it's a little more bassy in that mix. So I'm going to boost those lows a little bit, the resonance of those. But what's really making that sound is it's got delay and chorus, I think, or it could be a stereo delay with some phasing happening between the left and the right channel, because it sounds like in headphones, it sounds like that sound spinning around in my head. So let's go for the echo again. All right. And what I just did there, I shifted the right channel just a little bit out of phase. So now I'm hearing the left and the right slightly different, and we're hearing like a stereo modulation. And actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do what I suggested before. Instead of having a perfectly synced delay, which it's too perfect, I'm hearing some like it kind of makes the high kind of too sharp in a way. I want it to sound a little bit less perfect and a little bit more, some more modulation and movement in it. So they're not linked anymore. I've got them separate. All right. Actually, let's link them first, and then I'll adjust one separately. All right. So. And it sounds kind of, it's difficult to get it. Let's bring back the dry a little bit. I couldn't, once I had the feedback was too high and the wet signal was too high, so I couldn't hear the beat anymore. That's better. That's about a 16th note. Let's do more like that's about a 16th note. It's actually okay. So what I'm going to do is separate them now so they're a little bit different. That's better. There's a little bit of separation between those in stereo we can play around with. You can hear when I bring the feedback up, it starts to kind of resonate. Put a little short reverb on that. No, that's too much. This reverb in echo is not my favorite reverb. But as a delay, though, it's amazing. We can modulate it a little bit, maybe. A little bit of the delay time. That sound to me is so electronic. It's just pure electrical signal, but fitting in with the beat. Let's hear what it sounds like with the... Cosmic J mentions if you scope a mic signal from the speaker playing that tick, you'll see it ringing. Right. And Jason knows what's up with the trigger. Actually, you sampled the 909 trigger, which is a very similar sound. And yes, Electro is probably like, of all of, Cosmic J is saying just a little techie nerdiness. And, if you're here, you have some of that in you, right? Electro is just like the perfect music for, fundamental tech nerdiness. It's a lot of electro, funk or not, is really kind of focused on and fetishizing this pure electronic sound. It's not ever trying to sound real. And, a lot of the best sounds for electro aren't overly complicated. I mean, there are some exceptions. There's some there's some electro producers out there that push the boundaries with sound design for sure. But I really love when, sounds like that. Right. So we're coming down to the wire with time. It's almost 2:00. I had to get to the bass. We spent a lot of time talking about the drums and talking about the funk. And it's hard to, when you're using just these pure electronic sounds, like what's funky about it? Well, one is the feel of the rhythm. And also, electro funk is kind of a step removed from your typical acoustic oriented, organic kind of funk music, right? But it has that element in there. And we talked about the emphasis on the downbeat. And then another layer of that is, on the musical side of it, in the rhythm section, what the bass is doing, and the bass and how it interacts with the rhythm of the drums. So, and then also in terms of like sound design, just real quick before we sign off, this is one of my favorite synths for, I mentioned the 101. This is the Uhi's version of the Pro one. It's a little more complex than what we had back in the day. It's got built-in effects and a more complex sequencer, things like that. It sounds so good, and this is just like an archetypal instrument for electro, bass, and lead sounds. And I don't even mind. I didn't quantize that melody that I played in. It has a little looseness to it, and that's another thing that I would look for in something that has a funk kind of feel, is that it has a little bit of push and pull in the rhythm, and it has that human error, right? So it's time. We're done. I've got to wrap things up and get on with my day and hang out with my family and do what I got to do. So thanks everyone for being here today on this little bit of an exploration of electro and electro-funk rhythm and style. We had a little bit of history there. And congratulations to our winner, Mike McClure, who is a name that I know. Autokinetic, great producers. We've had a release from Autokinetic early on our record label Serotonin. So big congratulations to our old pal, Mike McClure, who gets the 4-month Splice subscription. And with that, don't forget, actually, next up, I think on Monday, we've got, the week starts over and dolltr has tips and tricks show on the 343 TV stream at 1 p.m. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to like or dislike. Let us know. Check out the links below. And tune in next time. Adios.